week. And
a week from tonight, Chester Brown.
And you really got to come to that because it's going to be unbelievable.
Lots of hair pulling.
It's like his book about his experiences with prostitutes over the years, and it's truly like half nauseating and half. I mean, I haven't had an experience like that in years where I just started a book and 4.5 hours later I was still, hadn't moved. He's such a good cartoonist. It's really riveting. But I don't know. In terms of like comic books, hardly anybody even does comic books anymore, like ongoing series.
Well, tell that to Marvel and DC. I mean,
not that who does them that are any good.
Well, there you go. I mean, that's.
Well, The Walking Dead, it's incredibly popular and incredibly good.
Okay, I haven't seen it.
Also, have you read anything like Wild Last Man or Creature?
I haven't. No, you shouldn't even ask me these questions.
Yeah.
I'm an old man. I don't. That stuff's for kids.
We'll talk at the signing.
Chip
I'm more your kind of person.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've read all that stuff.
I'm reading like the AARP magazine, Sunset.
One of my favorite books is Like a Velvet Glove Cast in Iron. I was wondering what your main inspiration was for that.
My miserable life at the time. I mean, that was like done at the lowest point of my life. Like I was just really like depressed and had just gotten divorced and was like, penniless and everything was going badly. And so it was just, literally I just tried to put like my weird little daydreams and dreams and stuff like that on paper and I adopted this idea of like anything that seemed embarrassing or like too painful to deal with, I would try to go further in that direction. So that was what I was trying to do at the time.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Do you write it as you go along or improvise it or plan it first or both?
I've done it every way. I always think that I'm going to find like the way that works really good. Like this is the perfect way to do it. And I've been doing that for 30 years. And I never quite have come up with that. So I try something new every time. It was like when I was a kid, I used to look at the, Marvel comics and stuff, and I'd go like, how do they do these lines? There's these perfect ink lines. And I was convinced there was like a special pen that you could get. So every week I used to go to the art store and try a new pen, and I'd get these weird pens like photo retouching pen. This has got to be it. This is perfect. And I get home and it's not it. And finally somebody told me, no, it's a brush. They use a watercolor brush. And I thought like, no, you can't do a line like that with a brush. And then that was really what it was. And so I bought a brush and I couldn't do it. But since I knew that was the right tool, that's what I used, and so finally after 20 years I learned how to do it. That wasn't your question though, but my Alzheimer's kicks in. You again.
I know that you're supposed to do a project with Michel Gondry and Paul Gondry. When is that supposed to be coming out?
I don't know. He started. We were doing that before he got the job to make the Green Hornet. And so he just like disappeared to make the Green Hornet, and I don't know what that did to poor Michelle. That was a big movie. Okay, you want me to start calling on people? There's a guy way in back.
There's two here.
Okay.
As a screenwriter, are there any particular screenwriters that you like or are a fan of?
Yeah, I like individual screenplays. Like I really like Paul Schrader, like his classic period. I mean, what's not to like about those? But he was really doing some good stuff for a while. And I like Charlie Kaufman. I enjoy his screenplays a lot. All those old Hollywood guys really knew how to tell a story. All those, the guys who wrote for Hitchcock, Ernest Lehman, and guys like that. Yeah.
Hi.
Hey.
I saw this illustration of yours. It was like some kind of DC spoof with like Bizarro World. I thought it was hilarious, but what was the story behind
You
that?
can let Mr. Kidd can handle that one because it's on his wall in his apartment.
I'm glad you asked. God, that was what, 15 years ago?
I don't think it was that long.
When DC decided they were going to do this Bizarro collection, and it was, I thought it was a good idea, and it was like, okay, we're going to get alternative comics people to draw our mainstream characters any way they want to, blah blah blah. So the editor called me up and said, would you approach Mr. Clowes on our behalf to do the cover? And I said, I will do so, but be fully prepared for him to say, go soak your head. So I called him up, and he, to my amazement and delight, he said, sure, I think that sounds like fun. And so what he did was he made it look like it was a super...
Like an 80-page giant from 1964.
80-page giant from 1964. So you had the central image of Bizarro, and then he did all these wonderful panels about, you know...
It was like the alternative comics version of superheroes. So it was like, can't even remember any of it. It was like the day Green Arrow took a second job, and just these
Right.
boring, mundane alternative comics.
Wonder
kind of
Woman
stories.
in therapy.
Yeah,
And
there was like Wonder Woman's big endorsement deal.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Batman Sad and
Yeah.
Alone, I remember,
Right.
was one.
Right.
So he sends this to me, and these were in the early days of the internet, actually, and email and all that.
Before I had the internet. that's
No, I
for
was completely blown away by it. I thought it was so cool, and I sent it into DC, and I said, "Can you believe this? This is like the greatest thing ever." And there was a sort of stony silence, and you always know, no news is never good news, ever in this situation. It means they don't like it, and they can't figure out how to tell you, and they've probably already hired somebody else. And sure enough, in about a week, they got back to me, and they said, we all just feel that this will create too much confusion in the marketplace because it looks like an 80-page giant from the early 1960s, and that's what people will think this book is. And
that might have actually sold, unfortunately.
well, anyway, in the meantime, of course, they had hired Matt Groening.
It actually wasn't.
It wasn't
Matt
Matt.
Groening, I talked to him years later, and he didn't know anything about it because he has this guy who draws in his style for projects like that. He doesn't have time for that. And so the guy did it.
And which everybody knew.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's known. It's not like, they're pulling the wool over somebody's eyes, but Matt was he was quite apologetic when he heard the story.
Well, anyway, I freaked out, and Dan was actually very magnanimous about it. He's just like, okay. Well,
I was sort of relieved. I was like,
well.
It sounded like fun, but every fiber of my being thought that this can't go well.
And anyway,
glad
so
to be proven wrong.
I was totally pissed off and said that I would never work for them again, and I didn't for a whole 4 months.
I really appreciate that, man.
It was solidarity. And anyway, but I published it in a monograph that I did for Rizzoli, and it also in that big, fat, huge Taschen History of DC Comics book.
It's in there?
Yeah.
I didn't even know that.
Oops.
Do I get a free copy?
Oops. You should. You should. Because those guys, the Taschen guys were really, really cool, and they wanted all the weird stuff, and they came to my apartment and just looked at everything.
I want that book.
We'll get you a copy.
Okay. Thanks.
So I have two questions that I think are
I can't figure out where the voices are coming.
I don't know what
It's disembodied.
I don't need this.
It's like they're just coming under the table. Sorry.
Yeah, I have two questions. I think
Yes.
First one's about Art School Confidential.
Right.
And I mean, I don't know if it's just that you really hated art school, but I mean, it seems like you really hated abstract expressionism, conceptual art, and all of that. And I was wondering if you actually did hate it then, and if you still feel that way now, or if you just don't care.
I didn't hate it then, and I don't hate it now at all. But that wasn't what I wanted to learn. It was just the fact that I wanted to learn something that wasn't that, and that's all they were teaching. So that's all it is.
And the second one, I was wondering, like, I mean, I feel like David Boring and Velvet Glove read to me a lot like sort of, if you'll pardon the term, like postmodern novelists like Pynchon or Bard or Philip K. Dick or DeLillo. And I was wondering if you ever read those guys or if it was just sort of coincidence or how you feel about them at all.
You know, I probably had some awareness of them. Certainly, I probably read Philip K. Dick a little bit at that time, but when I did the Velvet Glove story, I don't think I had read DeLillo or Pynchon, and then everybody started talking about those guys. You know, oh, you must have read these guys, especially Pynchon. And so then after that, in between Velvet Glove and David Boring, I would have read those guys to sort of see what the comparisons were. But it's like Gilbert Hernandez, you know, was always being told his work was exactly like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and finally, after he'd been working for 15 years, he got around to reading it, and he was, oh yeah, it is similar. You know, you sort of pick up on these things without actually experiencing it. You know, had I read those, I might have pushed my work away from the ways they are similar. You know, I don't know. It's hard to say. Yes.
I was wondering if you hated New York.
Wait, do it into the microphone because I'm sure nobody can hear you.
Speaking of hate, I was kind of wondering if you hated New York during your time here. I was kind of reading.
No,
that
I loved it
okay.
here. I mean, I was here in what I call the taxi driver days of, you know, the late 70s, where, you know, you'd walk the streets and kids would throw bottles at your head, and, you know, bums would urinate on your date as you were walking along. You know, it was a very different world, and it was very exciting to be, you know, a kid and come here and see, you know, first week I was in New York, I saw Johnny Thunders on his hands and knees picking up pills off the sidewalk.
Do you
Can't
ever
beat
think
that.
of doing a quasi-autobiographical story about your time here?
Sometimes, yeah. Every time I come back, I'm like, you know, every corner, I'm like, yes, I remember, you know, my friend passing out right there. You know, the thing about New York, there's a certain permanence to it. Like, the facades don't really change so much. You know, the buildings are all kind of the same, and you really feel like you're in the same place 30 years later. Unlike, like in California, everything's just, you know, bulldozed over, and, you know, they put in a completely different building. It's a very different thing.
We have a question back here.
Way back here.
Hi. This is a long one, but when promoting Art School Confidential, the movie,
Yeah.
I heard an interview where you talked about the sort of bind that art schools are in with the difference between teaching you how to be an artist to explore and find your identity versus teaching you how to be an artist in terms of making yourself a marketable thing that can make a living.
Yeah.
And I was wondering how conscious that dichotomy was for you, sort of throughout your career. If that was something that you ever thought about, or if it was ever in the back of your mind, or how has that governed the way you made choices or told your stories?
Well, you know, as I was saying when I was talking about my early comic 8-ball, you know, I did that without any thought at all that anybody would like it or that it would have any resonance with anybody. And pretty much everything I've ever done that's been successful is that way. And so I've learned to kind of trust that I need to do work that I find interesting, and that I can't guess what an audience is going to like. I'm really quite terrible at that. When I was like 15, I could do it really well. I could tell it. Every movie I could have told the marketers what movies were going to make money and what weren't. It's, you know, I just was tapped into that zeitgeist, and I'm so far out of that at this point that I never have a clue as to marketability. But you know, you try to do, you know,